This video is a semi-scripted adaptation of an essay I had written on the Wuthering Waves Notion. You can find the original article linked in the video description. With the end of the Resonators arc, we get our first overt look into the deep influences Abby will have in the story. However, the first ripples actually start with Chapter 1, Act 7, Thaw of Eons, where, as they are deciding a name for this echo, Abby mentions another name under their breath, Abraxas. Some of you might be quite familiar with that name. The name has origins as inscriptions on amulets or talismans where Abraxas was written and were believed to possess magical qualities. However, Abraxas is also recognized as a mystical Gnostic word or a Gnostic deity. The mythological entity is recognized as a sort of progenitor god, a supreme deity from which all other sources of divinity emanate from. With such a name, I had speculated that Abraxas is the very same most powerful tacit discord, the prime Threnodian, so to speak, that gave form to Abby as we know now. An echo that, even in its current form, both Threnodians we have met thus far have shown a certain response to. But Leviathan's reaction is rather unique, in that it actually has something to say.
Abraxas! Why hast thou betrayed us?
And is rather surprising to hear it cry out in anger and frustration. But there's something odd here. Abby has been present since the beginning of Resonators. Leviathan should have been aware of their presence the second Rover stepped onto Raghanese territory. But that's not the case at all. Leviathan has been seemingly blind to Abby's presence for most of, if not the entire time. Before the events of Mount Firmament, we find out that Abby and Rover are inextricably linked through a phenomenon called convergent codependency. Their frequencies are merged to the point where one's well-being and strength affects the other. So, in other words, they share a soul link. But there's a few extra threads we can pull here. In physics, there is a concept referred to as wave interference. We can simply define this as two or more coherent wavelengths combining to make a new wave. In cases where waves clash and destroy each other, it's referred to as destructive interference. On the other hand, in cases where waves actually result in a stronger amplitude, they're referred to as constructive interference. Now, while we do not have a concrete report on Rover's current status, we have much evidence that Rover's power has not diminished in any capacity compared to the first resonator documented in Jinzhou, which already outlines Rover's forte profile. So it's relatively reasonable to perceive convergent codependency as a form of wave interference. It's important to note, though, that it doesn't matter whether or not Rover's power was stronger or weaker compared to their past. What is, though, both Rover and Abby's frequencies are essentially indistinguishable from each other without robust analytical tools. Let's use two speakers as an example of how this might look like. And here we go. We have two speakers that are in phase or in sync with each other. Two distinct sources, but they play one thing in tandem, with little to no conflict in output. And if you're far away enough, you cannot tell that they are two distinct sources. Baizhi and Yang Yang are prime examples of this lack of noticing, as both have frequency sensitivity and assessment capabilities through their forte. It's only through Baizhi's physical in a high-tech laboratory that she's able to glean this information.
To put it simply, it seems there is another dimension or a creature hiding inside your body.
There are, however, two individuals who were able to detect Abby off the cuff. Jue notices Abby in Rover's tacit mark. They then make specific mention that for Abby to reside in the mark, Rover must have granted access at some point. Meanwhile, Shorekeeper makes a deliberate mention that Abby's frequencies have been dwelling in Rover for millions of years. It's fair to say that both Shorekeeper and Jue are the exceptions that prove the case. Jue is effectively a hyper-advanced AI biocomputer, while Shorekeeper is made up of sonoro frequencies capable of fine spatial manipulation, both of whom are intimately more aware of Rover's baseline condition. You know, all this talk of overlaid and similar frequencies should be pretty familiar in a different context. The Second Resonance Awakening. The phenomenon where two entities resonate with each other at high intensities to the point that the weaker of the two can catapult its own resonance power beyond the original capacity. In the case of the appointed Resonators, it allows them to gain access and inherit powers that only a Sentinel, and in the case of Cartathea, a Threnodian, could wield. However, this bond still pales in comparison to the depths of the convergent codependency. If Abby or Rover grow stronger, the other will also grow. Conversely, if Cartathea or Jinshi grow stronger, their associated Sentinel will not grow. Additionally, even if they have an incredibly close relationship or resonance, each appointed Resonator's frequencies are still distinguishable from the Sentinels or Threnodians. It should be noted, though, that Cartathea is in a unique position because of Leviathan's attempt to assimilate into her 20 years prior to the events in-game. Hence, the success of the Maiden's plot to hide in the Dark Tide in the events of Chapter 2, Acts 10 and 11. Speaking of hiding, there's a few extra benefits and handicaps we should pay attention to. First, being interwoven into Rover's frequencies offers a sort of natural camouflage and allows Abby to be present without alerting certain parties. After all, Leviathan would have likely behaved differently when trying to use Rover as its harbinger. It knows how Abraxas' power functions. Additionally, Overthrax only retreated after Abby revealed themselves. However, this path that they're on right now, seems relatively new and unknown, because this is very likely the first instance that Abby has manifested, as evidenced by Shorekeeper's surprise at Abby. She does not recognize them, physically at least, only their frequencies. Our dynamic tag team, as previously mentioned, is also capable of continuous evolution, evidenced by Rover's occasional power-ups, a sort of ever-adapting Second Resonance Awakening, so long as they assimilate new frequencies. Sounds dangerously familiar in a different sense, doesn't it? However, the opposite is possible. Both Rover and Abby can be weakened if these assimilated frequencies are removed. But there's a built-in countermeasure: access to Rover's tacit mark. It's considerably harder to target and injure Abby while hiding in the extraplanar space within Rover's frequencies, but there still are ways around this. Our biggest clue in that regard is Cristoforo, who knows what has transpired with Abby and some of their capabilities. He even goes so far as to surmise that it would be possible for Leviathan to revive by assimilating Overthrax's leftovers within Abby. That's not including how he and the other Fraxitus can then finagle events to render Abby to their own schemes. I mean, they doctored the many troubles that Renacita underwent, after all. What's stopping them from trying something else? Like, for example, forcing Abby to consume excessively, or bombard Rover with hostile frequencies. What happens then? Well, we sort of had a taste of that throughout versions 2.6 and 2.7. A weakening and erosion of mental fortitude with threat of possession. But beyond that right now, I don't have anything other than conjecture. I do, however, have an interesting theory that might be worth sharing, though. Quick question. Where did Abby come from? Abby has to have come from somewhere, clearly. Some people may even guess that the enigmatic woman from the first few minutes of the game placed them there. However, we just established that Shorekeeper recognizes Abby's frequencies within Rover's, so it's very improbable that she shoved Abby in as part of Rover's reawakening, but instead put in something else. The only other information we have at the moment is the Huanglong mythology that Rover showed up and absorbed the Threnodian. This also would suggest that Abby did not come pre-bundled with Rover before they began their mission to stop the Lament. However, to combat such a being would not be easy and would either be an extremely uphill battle or have an unexpected outcome. The theory for you then, Rover and Abraxas brokered a deal. In exchange for their power to grow and evolve, Rover would grant Abraxas the fulfillment it so desired. It will be fed accordingly. We have a case where such an agreement is plausible, actually. Galbrena and Chimera. Not to mention, there is also the secondary case to be made for all playable Resonators having some narrative parallel with Rover's story, as a more indirect supplement. Though, a powerful being like Abraxas going missing is not going to go unnoticed in certain circles. Within those same circles, one could also recognize when Abraxas' power is used. Then, in that case, what better way than to hide it right under everyone else's noses then? It's someone else's power. There's no way it could have been Abraxas's, right? I certainly don't detect anything similar to a Threnodian. In conclusion, Abby's been by our side for quite some time now, but we know very little about Abraxas still. That past has been carefully concealed in many facets. Not even Tethys has a clue at this time, or maybe it was even scrubbed clean. In any case, we have much to look forward to, I think. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.